tonight we're going to tie a whistler fly. This fly is good for pike and bass, and this is like a kind of a classic whistler color with red, white, and blue. You can tie these in any color you want. Here we have one that's just red and white, very good for pike. And here we have one that's supposed to mimic a perch. So we've got orange, red, yellow, green. This fly is typically tied on a size 3/0 hook, but tonight I'm going to show you how you can do it on a smaller hook. So this is a size 1 Mustad Titan X hook. We will need some flash, so we'll be putting in some silver flash in the tail. The other part of the tail section will be made up of white bucktail. There'll be some pearl flashaboo over the top of the bucktail. I'm going to tie in a darker color, in this case an orange. We're going to use two feathers from a grizzly. In this case it's a bugger pack, two of the larger feathers. We will need some crystal chenille. In this case it's cactus chenille. I'm going to be using an orange. And I'm going to show you how to do the head with spinning extra select craft fur in case you do not have a schlappen feather. So the other thing we will need is a set of bead chain eyes. These are a large set. And the only special tool we're going to use today is a dubbing spinner. Other than that, I'm going to be using some fluorescent red UTC 280 thread. So let's get started. I'm going to start my thread right behind the eye of the hook, lay down a small base of thread, and trim the tag end. And I'm going to tie on the dumbbell eyes behind the eye. Now, if you find when you fish this fly and it wants to turn upside down, you may have to tie these eyes on the bottom of the hook. But if you don't notice that it's fishing upside down, then you can tie it on the top. It probably would make a difference if you were tying on heavy dumbbell eyes, but these bead chains are fairly light, so we just want to make sure we get these tied on tight, doing X wraps over them, and then we're going to do our tightening wraps where we go under the eye, over the hook, under the eye, over the hook, and we will do that to secure them tight. Check them to see if they wiggle. This is a good spot to put in a drop of head cement right in between the eyes. Let that soak into the thread. While that's soaking in, I'm going to advance my thread towards the back using large overwrapping wraps. I just want to get the thread back there, but I'd also like to have a small base of thread to cover the hook. So the next thing we're going to do is take a fairly large bundle of crystal flash, in this case silver. When I say fairly large, we're talking 10 to 15 strands. When I trim those off, I want to come in and pull some of the ends to stagger the ends. And we roughly want this 3 times the length of the hook. So if we measured 3 times the length, it's about in half, which is good. So I'm going to just do a couple of quick wraps there, and I want to kind of push this to go all around the hook. And I'm going to couple more just to make sure they're good and tight, and I'll fold the rest back and secure that down. Now you may find it weird adding flash before you've added any bucktail or anything, but the key here is this is called the flash tail whistler, so we want some flash sticking straight out the back. Another thing I like to do when I'm tying on flash or anything like this and I want it to stand up is I'm going to wrap my thread behind the material, and I'm going to do that twice, and that way it kind of just holds it up off the hook and keeps it from failing or wrapping around the barb. The next thing, we're going to add a small bunch of bucktail, and we want this stuff to flare a little bit, so we can use some fairly straight stuff. And again, we're not making a huge thick bucktail fly. We're wanting to have fairly sparse materials on this. So I'm going to pinch it in the middle, drag out any of the smaller fibers. And this fly we want to have some flash sticking out. So when I hold my bucktail up, I can see I have about a ½ inch of flash beyond the end, and that's about perfect. So I'm going to squish it all around the hook, measure it again. I think I could go a little longer. Yep. Just advance this a little bit back farther. I'm going to do 2 wraps and then push it down, wiggle it over the hook, and then on the 3rd wrap I'm going to just tighten it down. Not looking for it to spin necessarily, although I saw this did spin, but what we're looking for is that flare, you'll see. So I'm going to give a couple more good wraps and then trim this. Now I want to just wrap down over those ends, making sure it's good and tight. A couple stragglers. Now we want to bring our thread back up, make a little kind of cone here, and this is where we're going to tie on our second color. So in this case I'm using a pearl flashaboo, and I'm going to grab again 15-20 strands. And just like the first time, we're going to spread that out. I think I got more than 20. I think I got more than 20, but we want to have this so it goes about the length of the bucktail here. And again, to make it easy, I'm going to come up with 2 light wraps. Use my thumb to squish it down. Fold all the remaining material back and just wiggle it in place. We don't need it to go on the bottom really, we want it to go mostly on the top and sides. So I'm gonna tie that good, trim off any stragglers, and look to see. I can see that some of my flash is going just as long as the rest, the first bunch we tied on. So if you find it's too long, you can always trim it. There. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do is tie in our color. And I'm going to do an orange head on this. I don't have to do necessarily an orange body. You can choose to do a different color at this time, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to just stick with one color. And about the same size bunch of bucktail that we did the first round. And clean out the strays, and if you have some really long ones, get those out. So we don't need this bucktail to go back necessarily as far as the white, but pretty close. So again, I'm going to hold this on. I'm not wrapping it all the way around the hook. I'm going to give a couple of tighter wraps and just kind of move it a little bit so it goes around the sides. And I'm just going to tighten this down good. And we'll trim off all the excess. Can't stress enough how good it is to have a rotary vise when it comes to stuff like this. You don't worry about cutting your thread. Alright. So like with the first bunch, we're just going to tie it down and make a good head. And you'll see how the white is just slightly longer than the orange here. So our next step is going to be tying in some hackle feathers, and you can decide if you wanted to do all orange, you could, or if you want to tie in a different color. Hold them up here, and I think for this we'll just stick to orange. So I want the feather tied in about the length of the bucktail, and I'm just going to hold it and just do a couple of big wraps so I can get it positioned. Put the one in on the opposite side. And I'm not worried about cleaning the feather off because this is a rather large fly. We don't have to worry about fine details like that. But you do want it on the side of the hook. Which is why it pays to do a loose wrap first before you tighten anything up. So the feathers tacked in, I'm going to just trim the excess away. Give a couple of good wraps to make sure they're tight and fairly even. And we're going to tie in some cactus chenille. In this case I am using orange again. So strip the core a little bit, tie it in nice and tight, and move my thread to right behind the eyes. Now I'll just wrap this forward and leave a little bit of room behind the eye. Tie it off. Alright, to do a dubbing loop, I'm going to stick my finger in, pull out a length of thread to the camera where you can't see it, do a couple of wraps in front, a couple behind, and I'm going to take the dubbing tool, dubbing spinner, place that in to hold the thread. Now we're going to take some craft fur, comb it up so I can get some long fibers. I'm going to pinch them with my fingers and cut close to the hide. Now you can see I'm still pinching them. I want to just lightly tease out the short stuff. And open this loop up. Fairly long, so we're going to just do the end like that and then start to spin. As you spin this, you'll see the hair start spinning. Get your flash out of there. And the thread will lock all the hair in place. What we don't want to do is not spin it enough. You can come in here and pull on it, it doesn't release, then I think we're good to go. So using this tool, we're just going to wrap it like we would a hackle feather, brushing the material back. Try not to wrap over yourself. Get right up behind the eye. Going to tie it off, so then I'll come up with the thread going behind the eye over the top of the dubbing loop a couple of times, and then we can trim off the dubbing thread. And we're ready to whip finish. Now, as you can see, the craft fur sprays out on the front, is very wispy, and has incredible action in the water. So, that's the instructions we've put together. Go ahead and try this for yourself. Leave comments if you need to, and experiment with different colors. So, happy fishing.